Good morning. I'm Max Gross, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us for the 2020 Future Property Forum. One of the biggest questions we're facing, especially now, is the question of how our buildings will be safe. Safe for workers, safe for the planet, safe for the future. The building industry has put a greater focus on making safety, sustainability, and efficiency central pillars in the planning, design, construction, and operation of our office buildings. Urban trends have seen a major shift toward green communal spaces and the adoption of technology to make security processes faster and more efficient. Now, facing an unprecedented pandemic, the industry is addressing new challenges and reassessing what it means to create a safe environment. We're excited to welcome you all to our first Future Property Forum, pairing major real estate owners with top solutions providers to discuss the innovative programs and services being put into place to make commercial office spaces greener, healthier, and safer. Today, you'll hear about the short and long-term changes being applied to New York's trophy assets as the workforce begins returning to the office. Our expert speakers will also discuss the synergies of green, efficient properties and post-pandemic building operations, as well as how flex and co-working providers are positioning themselves to provide tenants with flexibility during this time of uncertainty. I'd like to take a moment to thank today's event sponsors, Atmos Air Solutions, Essensis, Fogarty Fingered Architecture, iLuminosity, Kasowitz Benson Torres, Castle Systems, MG Engineering DPC, Prescriptive Data, and View. I also want to thank our association partners, NIAP NYC and the New York City Building Congress. I'd like to now introduce Nick Rizzi, Commercial Observer reporter and program facilitator for today's Future Property Forum.
Hi, sorry, I couldn't tell if I was on. Thanks, Max, and thank everybody for tuning in this morning. A couple of house cleaning items before we get started. I'd like to thank today's Q&A sponsor, iLuminosity. iLuminosity is nationally revolutionizing the LED lighting industry. As a manufacturer of LED lighting, sensors, and control, and their latest line of UVGC lighting, iLuminosity is dedicated to service, working with businesses from Fortune 500 companies to small businesses of any size. Now on the panel, all attendees will be muted throughout the event, but we encourage you to submit any questions you may have for the speakers throughout the program. You can do this by entering them in the Q&A box in your control panel. The monitors will reserve time at the end of each panel to address as many questions as possible. If you're looking to connect with any of today's speakers, let us know. You'll receive a live poll at the conclusion of each panel asking if you'd like to connect with today's speakers. We'll pass your contact information along to all speakers you select. It's now my pleasure to introduce our first panel. Our opening panel is called Office Triage, Assessing the Short and Long-Term Changes Being Applied to Trophy Assets. It's moderated by Michael Gerazunas, the President and Managing Principal at MG Engineering DPC. Panelists include Craig Deitzelweg, the President and CEO of Marks Realty, Gavin Evans, the Executive Vice President of Acquisitions at Columbia Property Trust, Robert Finger, a founding partner at Fogarty Finger Architecture, Haniel Wynn, the CEO of Castle Systems, and Nadir Settles, the Managing Director, New York Regional Head of Offices of the Americas for Nuveen. With that, we'd like to start the first panel.
Great. Good morning, everyone. How you doing? Welcome to today's 10 o'clock panel discussion, where we'll be talking with landlords to find out what they're thinking about any short-term changes and long-term plans to address how the future of the office will look after these unprecedented challenges due to the COVID-19 crisis. My name is Michael Gerazunas. I'll be moderating. This is the first of 3 sessions today. For those who don't know me, I am the President and Managing Principal of MG Engineering, full-service mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection consulting engineering firm headquartered here in Midtown Manhattan. Much of the projects we work on are with the city's largest building owners and managements, as well as new development. We've already got a little intro of all our attendees. on the panel. So I guess what we'll do is go right into a list of questions that we've kind of vetted out. And I'm going to start off with Nadir. What are some of the immediate actions you have taken at your properties to ensure safety? And what are some of the more short enhancements and long-term measures?
Yeah, good morning, Michael, and good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So in general, I just think buildings of the future that will attract best tenants will be those that adapt sort of best practices on health and wellness. And so, you know, and as we look at sort of reoccupying, we look at it in a sort of a phased approach. And there are enhancements that we've sort of thought about what can you immediately do and what can you do more on the long term. And some of the immediate enhancements are certainly increasing the presence of sanitizers. You know, we require for our buildings face masks be worn at all times during in common areas. Putting down markers for directing traffic to ensure social distancing. Building apps. We think this can certainly sort of decrease face-to-face as you can order from the restaurant. You can put in sort of building issues. So certainly integrating building apps in all buildings. And then just more deep cleaning. So we went to sort of a higher touch of, you know, updating to electrostatic sprayers. And so, you know, that's sort of some of the immediate stuff. We'll certainly innovate and continue to adapt what's best practices. And as we think about some of the sort of near-term and longer-term stuff, it sort of touches everything from forcing doors, elevators, destination dispatch. Improving our HVACs in buildings that we're not sort of, the body isn't open, where we're looking at the retrofitting, what's the best way to sort of start to get better ventilation and improve the HVACs. And then as occupancy increases, certainly where applicable, we can have sort of doormans to help with sort of that initial entry.
We have some other landlords on the panel here. Craig, Gavin, anything along that line to chime in on?
Sure. So, you know, we're always thinking about what we can do for health and wellness, not just for today, but also for tomorrow. So some of the measures that we're doing, like the UV lights and ionization systems, things like that, we think are always good for fighting the cold, the flu. So even post-pandemic, those will always be measures that people will really care about.
I mean, that's what we've seen, you know, from, you know, we do a lot of work with a lot of landlords like yourselves. And, you know, there's a lot of different positions, so to speak, with regards to the mechanical infrastructure and its net effect with regards to the COVID-19. You know, it's I don't think there's any documented cases of anybody being infected by the mechanical systems. However, you know, some of these things I feel strongly are pretty much more psychological and definitely don't hurt. You know, anytime you can improve the indoor air quality in your space. I suffer from allergies in April and May. The cleaner the air can be, the less red my eyes are, the less sneezing I'm doing, the less coughing. So it definitely doesn't hurt. And I think realistically, it's something that, you know, your tenants want to see action. They want to see something. So there is some money that needs to be spent, but at the end of the day, I think it's, you know, the buildings are better in the long run. So Gavin, how about yourself? Any of your buildings, you know, from the actual enhancements at this point that you guys have implemented?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, glad to be here with everybody. We seem to be crawling back into normal, and that's both internal and with our tenants. I say crawl because while we, Columbia, our office is open, we're in a 50% rotation. I think everyone knows that New York City as a whole has not, you know, while it can open 50%, I think a lot of tenants have elected to not. So things are quiet. I think that's a good thing because I think if everybody showed up a couple weeks ago at 50%, it would have been a zoo. So I think operationally, there's this is a time where we can, we did a lot of planning to get open, but now we're kind of doing a dress rehearsal of sorts. We surveyed our tenants. We tried to think of everything we could to make the experience safer. And like you said, Michael, some of it is form over function, right? This is a very psychological, emotional thing. Not that the virus isn't real,
Sure.
but a lot of the measures that are being done aren't necessarily scientifically proven, but it feels better when you have to touch less things. It feels better when, there's extremely low capacity in an elevator, in the bathrooms. We are restricting our elevators to 2 people per cab. We are encouraging people to not talk while in the elevator. Obviously using masks. As it relates to the buildings itself, we're investing, and it's not that expensive, in a technology bipolar ionization.
Sure.
And we investigated a number of things. We're looking at some supplemental, and that's that sort of is one layer of protection. We're upgrading the filters, the air filters to be sort of, I'm not the expert in that, but
I got you.
Michael,
No, you leave it to me. I'm the expert on those things, but yeah, I mean, there has been some very much knee jerk to go with the HEPA filters, and anybody who knows it's a high efficiency particulate filter, which unfortunately costs a lot of money. It's not 100% perfect. There's still microns that can get through, and it can significantly affect your fan systems as well. So, I think a measured approach is probably the best way to go to improve some of those systems. Again, in the end of the day, with regards to COVID, is it going to be the 100% solution? No, but at the end of the day, you will have a better operating building once that's in place. So
I think, Mike, that's what's most important, right? Like these landlords that are on the phone, the presence of COVID actually focused us on the acceleration of that, right? Like in our buildings, we want them to be best known for health, wellness, hygiene. COVID accelerated that, but with or without COVID, we were always aiming to sort of have those type of buildings. And so I think that was just generally a focus for us.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's a great point, Nadir. Because one last thing I was going to say on the filter side, and whether it's filters or touchless features, you want to do as much as you can to make people feel good, but you have to balance that with not providing a false sense of security, right? We don't know what works and doesn't. Even our government leaders don't seem to know. So we're trying to do everything we can that's logical, but people need, we're creating what we believe is a safe environment, but people should still wear masks. They should still wash hands. They should still do all the other things that have nothing to do with the building itself. But your point, Nadir, I agree with. We think overall, and as we think about the medium and long term, we think that there had been a trend towards, buildings that promoted wellness, buildings that had, higher ceilings and amenities and outdoor space.
And Gavin, fresh air, like outdoor spaces have always been important, but now more than ever. So we're seeing a lot of tenants actually use our terrace as a conference room. So we have long tables and we set up the seats that way. And a lot of people are liking that. And even just, this building has operable windows, for instance, and people are opening the windows and allowing fresh air. And I think that's a really easy way to get that clean air in there as well.
Yeah, you think we're in California. So, it's really great. I mean, a lot of it is what you're saying is, again, I think definitely has a long-term benefit. And, listen, this is all a dress rehearsal and a learning curve for the next, sooner or later it may happen again. So, these are all things that we should really take into account. as a, I guess as a follow-up to that going forward, this is something we can bring some of the other panelists in. Again, Haniel is with Castle Systems, and Haniel, Castle's in the business of protecting your clients and securing their spaces. What are you doing to help protect your clients and buildings to ensure a safe return to work? Because as we're talking before, it's a psychological thing. So people have to feel comfortable coming in. So, and you guys with Castle, I'm sure play a big part of that as well. So.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, and it's great to be here with all you guys. So I think there is a sense that perception of safety is as important as actual safety itself. So I think I would agree with that comment. About 3 or 4 months ago here at Castle, we saw that our building and employer clients had a lot of uncertainty as they were looking forward at that time to getting people back to the building. And so, as a company, we've been around for almost 50 years, thinking about systems, processes, technologies in the access control video kind of business. And so we created a framework that we call Castle Safe Spaces, which is a way to think about how to make sure that people are feeling safe to get people back in the office. And there are 4 things that we've talked about with our clients I'll share here. So there's a first pillar, which I think Gavin mentioned a little bit earlier, that, making everything touchless. And so if you think about all of the different surface areas that you touch from getting into the building to get to your desk, lots of places that you could pass along the virus, potentially doors, counters, and elevators. A lot of people talk about that. And so we have, we're thinking about how do you enable our clients to do a lot of that hands-free through a range of technologies, from a mobile credential that sits on your phone instead of a plastic badge, or a mobile credential that's on an app, to touchless visitor management systems. And we've been doing this for 4 to 5 years now, I think, as a company, where originally, to the point of short-term and long-term coming together, we originally had thought about these as tenant experience capabilities, but now just applied very differently to health safety. And eventually it comes back, if you've got a touchless experience, it actually is a better experience. And that will, I think, persist well after COVID, is done. The second pillar we talk about is, we call it screening in, screening out. So here we're helping our clients screen out people who are sick or symptomatic of being sick. Eventually signs will catch up, and we can maybe have antibodies, and we'll screen people in who are safe. But we did a bit of a survey a while ago of 1,000 employees, and we asked them what mattered to them in bringing people back to the office. And they said about 7 of 10 of them said it would be a showstopper for me if the building didn't screen people out who are going to get me sick. And that's a big deal here. And so one of the important things that we're working through with clients is how to implement the basic screening questions. So, like, are you sick? Have you been exposed? That kind of stuff. But the thing where we are pushing further on is to make that a closed loop system, so that it connects to access control. So you can't get in unless daily you do this attestation thing that you're clear. And in fact, actually, the recommended guidelines in some states like New York have required this to be the thing. So in that requirement, if you've got a closed loop system, then you can do audit trail and reporting to make sure that you've got that set up and everybody's doing it. And then the final part of screening that we've been having a lot of conversations with clients about is, and Craig especially knows about, the thermal camera screening and the temperature checking kiosks and all that, which a lot of different organizations are exploring. Just a quick short other two. So the third one is leveraging access control technology and data to enable better social distancing. And so think about all the spaces where you care about how dense the space is, from a floor to a gym, bathrooms. Lots of people are talking about bathrooms right now. How do you use the counts to make sure that you're not having too many people go past a threshold and then signaling to somebody if you do? A lot of our clients are asking us to put these exit readers in place, because access control allows you to have, every time you badge somebody in, there's a count. We're recommending to clients to turn on their access control systems 24/7, so you're always getting a count. And then adding these exit readers allows you to get a count when they leave as well. And then the last pillar that we talk about is sort of on related technology, is how do you use the same access control system and data to help us with contact tracing. And so, unfortunately, people are going to get in who are sick. And if you've got an understanding of who was in the space at the same point in time, then you can inform them and make sure that they're aware, and they have to take kind of quarantine measures. The point, maybe I'll close on this, and I'll put it to my colleagues here on the call. The thing that we are talking to a lot of our clients about is it's important for the buildings and employers to have a conversation about this, because there seems to be some folks who'd say, yeah, the other people are going to take care of it, whoever the other people are, and given they're multi-tenants in a space, you just need to develop a holistic solution, so we're all in it together, as people say. But that matters the most inside of a building as you're taking and thinking about precautionary measures that you're going to be taking.
Sure. Yeah, it's, I mean, one question I'd probably pose to you too is that very early on when we went into early lockdown, there were a lot of opportunists out there too. I actually had a laptop stolen out of my office because somebody came in under the guise of being a cleaning person and, slipped in and just saw something and took it. And I'm just curious, I'm sure we weren't the only ones.
You were not. So what was interesting in the very early goings, we had such increase, like spike in demand and interest in video technology. And so a lot of spaces now are not physically being
occupied.
on.
Right. No reception error, no reception, no controls, no nothing. Yeah. Who's going to say no to somebody who looks legit, right? So
yeah, exactly. And so you can save a lot of that to the cloud, so you'll have a footage of it. But we also have remote video guarding services, so you can watch it from afar to know if something is happening inside your space.
Yeah, I'm going to pull Robert into this only from, I'm an engineer, Robert's an architect, and a lot of these things that we're talking about, physical barriers as well, and have these and how you can incorporate. Robert, anything to chime in here in terms of what you, from a security standpoint? And then, we can pass it on to our landlords to see what they've been doing.
I think well, thank you, Michael. I think from a security standpoint, I don't see a lot of escalation in terms of where we've been to date. There's certainly going to be more monitoring, and there's definitely an interest in monitoring the environment. You spoke about the mechanical systems. One thing that I just would touch on in that is understanding the leasing mentality, right? That's where we get involved. Either I'm with the tenant or I'm representing a landlord, and we're talking about leasing. And new leasing is something that's going to be even more important starting, from today for we don't know how long.
Sure.
But then when you think about a mechanical system, for instance, it's what's really going to help. So in new development, we're looking at increased fresh air. But in existing buildings, it's a little more focused on the tenant space itself, which you can imagine, right? So what can we do? And you touched on it, whether it's UV protection, which may not actually take care of all the viruses, but it does make for a healthier environment. It's very expensive and has an operating cost and may not make the most sense. HEPA, as you said, is difficult on an existing system because it's a higher degree of filtration and causes issues with the fans. But it also has brand name recognition. So I think for a new development, being able to say, yes, we have HEPA filters, we have this much fresh air, that actually has value in a leasing conversation. It's something that everyone understands what that means.
Sure.
Elevators, new development, it's easy, and existing ones that have destination dispatch, super easy, right? Tie that to your turnstiles if you have them, and you can manage the number of people in any elevator, and you can create a completely touchless experience, right? Hands-free, which is awesome. And in new development, we were already seeing a trend, at least in the boutique office buildings, when we're working on 3 of those with one company and another one with another company. We've been going towards private restrooms because that's appealing to somebody looking at a boutique floor plate, a single tenant. A little more additional upfront cost, but again, speaks to leasing. And it's the #1 answer for dealing with COVID in terms of the restrooms. Very challenging, if you can imagine the extra.
Sure.
With an open restroom, partitions and sinks lined up. But it sounds like Castle has some good solutions to manage around that too.
Exactly. Craig?
I'll note one thing that's actually just listening to sort of the co-panelists here and just thinking about this. What's exciting and encouraging is actually, as landlords here sitting here on this panel, is that we have always been thinking about this, as we've noted, best practices for health wellness, but you add sort of a global focus, everybody focus. It's actually exciting and encouraging to know that this is not just us trying to handle it in this isolated group, but state, local governments, regional country heads, this global problem, everybody trying to solve this together. And with this many minds, we will have best and brightest ideas, and our buildings will make better for it.
Awesome. Craig, Gavin, anything on the security front?
Not on the security front per se, but on what Robert's point was. So we are also doing individual bathroom stalls for that purpose as well. And then what we also are doing in our fitness centers is we're having individual rooms in the fitness centers for an individual workout. So there'll be a Peloton room, a mirror room, and I think that's also a good way. You know, we were doing it, you know, thinking of privacy, but in this world too, it's also good just for, you know, not having your germs go to other people.
Sure.
So it's a good way to control that as well.
Actually, this lines up right after a question I was lining up for you, Craig. Obviously, I know you guys have incorporated hospitality elements in a lot of your buildings. And again, I think you kind of mentioned it, but maybe you can expand a little bit more these COVID features. I think you mentioned, you know, obviously the bathrooms. Anything else that you can continue to expand on?
Sure. You know, so it's really important to us that our buildings be welcoming and they be special, you know, distinctive spaces. And that's not changing in this new world. So the trick is really incorporating these health and wellness measures into, you know, the hospitality world that we're creating. So we want it to feel hospitality-like, not hospital-like. So
Right.
you know, we don't want our signage to be, you know, warning signs and feel like you're going into a government building or into an airport or a hospital. People don't want to go to work to go to a hospital. So we still
Right.
have our signature scent, all of those things happening. And then what's, you know, a lot of it is just incorporating some of the fresh air that we talked about. So they're not seeing that, but it's happening. And then it just being a seamless system. So, you know, as some of the folks here spoke about, you know, having the app do your health survey, you know, doing the thermal temperatures in a way that people don't even know that they're being done. So it's just seamless and easy. And then in the spaces themselves, you know, we're using antimicrobial materials, so copper, bronze, brass, you know, incorporating those not just in the public spaces, but in our pre-builts as well. Our new pre-built at 545 Madison doesn't even have a door to enter the pre-built. You just go off the elevator, which is touches through your app, and you go right into the space. And so we think that's really important as well. And we'll see a lot more of that. And again, all of our pre-builts will have UV lights in them. In our lobbies in the Herald in DC, for example, we're having doors that open on an entire wall of the lobby with a patio outside, so you get fresh air at all times. And I think it's simple things like that that also work with what today's tenants want is really important. And I think you can do and be focused on health and wellness, but also be focused on creating a better environment, you know, a better experience in the offices too. And that's really how you get people back into the office, by creating these beautiful, you know, vibrant spaces that help people collaborate and be safe.
Yeah. Hey, Gavin, I'm sure that the trend has been a lot with these amenities in your properties. What have you been kind of doing?
Yeah, I mean, we a lot of the same. We have 2 developments underway, actually 3. One is 799 Broadway. It's a brand new boutique building, ground up at 11th and Broadway. We're well underway. We actually had topped out right around the time of COVID. And that said, we were able to make some changes. And some of those changes along these lines to address the things that are top of mind. We kind of have the fortune of delivering, we will deliver next summer and be kind of I think the newest delivery in Manhattan that has some of these extra COVID-like amenities, or, you know, extra health amenities. You know, we a lot of the things we had been doing, you know, if you have the destination dispatch elevators, as Robert said, it's really great. I mean, as you know, you scan your card, and not only does it let you through, but it then already automatically selects your floor. So you touch nothing. I've actually seen, I can't say we're gonna do it at our building. Maybe we're thinking about it, but facial recognition. So you don't even have to pull out the card, even though the card is your card and it's no one else is touching it. Facial recognition right on the turnstile, and then that's an even more seamless experience. As it relates to, we have another project that's much larger. It's called the Terminal Stores building. It's a full block between 27th and 28th and 11th and 12th Avenues. It's in Chelsea, just south of Hudson Yards, and it's a substantial asset, and we're doing a comprehensive renovation there, and we're doing all the things that Robert mentioned. We're doing obviously the touchless turnstile experience, but also private stall bathrooms. And I'll say on the elevator side of things, what's interesting there, that building was originally built as sort of 25 buildings that were connected. And, I admittedly 2 years ago, I would have thought we'd want to bring a central core and have, a wide open floor plan. And we've had the benefit of, we now have the optionality to actually have separate cores and give people a private entrance and a private elevator experience. And so while you can have a big floor plate upstairs, you can, we can centralize, but we can also decentralize the entrance experience. And so that's something that, people have talked about building within a building for years and years. And sometimes people used it. That could become a bigger trend if people want to secure their way in and way out. So we'll see where that goes, but these are the kinds of things we're talking about every day. Some of them are a continuation of the themes of pre-COVID, but some of these are good additions. These are good, healthy additions, make our buildings better. And I think if nothing else, like we surveyed tenants, we surveyed employees at Columbia, and one thing that did come up, surprisingly to me, was there's a lot of people that were sort of saying, hey, even after COVID's gone, if you're sick, please don't come in. But we have this, maybe more in New York than other places, but people kind of they don't want to lose a beat. They want to kind of be tough and hey, I got, I've now had a sick day in 10 years. And that just means you've gone in sick, right? And you've gotten other people sick. And
no, the mindset definitely has changed. There's no doubt about it. I think now, it's before we used to say, well, broken bones, sickness or whatever, at least you drag their ass into the office. But now it's more like stay away. So obviously it doesn't contaminate everything. So, which is, I guess, again, anybody else have something to
I was just gonna say, I think there's an underlying human behavioral change under a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, whether it's like, hey, I used to go into work when I'm sick, now I shouldn't, but whether I should even use an app to begin with, because a lot of times people are like, well, maybe I don't need to download the app. The other thing was just fine. But now all of a sudden they think differently, and that different is actually better, but it took a bit of a bump to get them over the threshold to do something, which I think is actually pretty good. The line that we say here is necessity is the mother of adoption. There's a change in mindset that comes about that would have been better off anyway, but you just have to bump them over to make them think that way. And we're seeing that a lot, actually.
Right. And, that kind of leads, I'm sorry.
Just a different spin on amenities, but I think it's all comprehensive in there that we're focused on. And Naveen, certainly a sustainability aspect as well. I know we've mentioned about sort of the rooftops, but, we're looking at places where we can build real gardens and use more of the curbside landscape as places to develop gardens, bike racks, using our technology to integrate, recycling and different aspects in that way, building beehives on the roof. So sustainability is also a focus as we look at the comprehensive package of amenities and how can we enhance that.
Gotcha.
And also, I think an easy thing to do is allow the tenants to use the stairs as well, and make the staircases clean. And we're even thinking of pumping music into our staircases to make it a pleasant walk up. So,
That's definitely, especially a multi-floor tenant and, or, you know, anything you can avoid having to jump back into an elevator is definitely, I think is deemed right now a little bit more convenient or more than anything else.
for sure. And it really helps the lower floors of the buildings too. You know, almost like 9/11 when everyone wanted to be on the bottom of the buildings. There's a little bit of that going on right now too.
Gotcha. We're talking about technology, obviously, as was part of a little bit before. You know, and one of these things that has popped up that I don't think anybody really predicted that was going to be so, I guess, quote unquote, successful. Gavin, I had this set up for you. What do you think of the future of the office, and how will the industry address the recently stated goals of companies making working from home more permanent for up to half of their employees, or a portion of, or, you know, this is I think one of the biggest quandaries that that I think people are going to be, you know, thinking about.
Sure. I've spent, you know, as an office landlord, we've spent a healthy amount of time on this topic, and I have a lot of thoughts. We, you know, for one, you know, the people took the most notice when Mark Zuckerberg said that 50% of his workforce is going to be at home in 10 years. I happen to think it's quite self-serving. I mean, Facebook and Instagram do better when people could be permanently logged on and not have a boss notice.
Exactly.
And so, you know, that's just, let's keep that out there. Let's, you know, they've also done quite well in this. So there's a lot of people that are unhappy being stuck sheltering in place, and yet, you know, they're doing great. So, you know, that's one data point. I happen to think that, you know, strongly believe that the reason people go to the office, it's not to process. I mean, yes, you can process. And I will tell you that my return to the office experience has been great. The air conditioning is better. The lighting is better. The Wi-Fi is better. The, you know, the ergonomics are better than my dining room here. But, you know, that's not why, and you can replicate the processing power at home. You all, I'm sure every one of us works extensively on the weekends. The problem is you don't get to, there's no mentoring. It's incredibly difficult to develop one's career or build relationships with colleagues, to collaborate, to really collaborate and idea generate, to certainly building relationships with people outside your company is even harder. Marianne Tai has, you know, said something that I thought was really right on, is that, you know, we're all working off of, I think the word she said is built up social capital. So, you know, I know
Absolutely.
Nadir, you know, I know Nadir. We've had dinner, we've had meetings, we've worked on deals. I can communicate with Nadir on Zoom, and, you know, it's not as good as it would be otherwise, but I can. But I can't, if people that I didn't know, you know, how do you build trust and create ideas, you know, share ideas? And so I think people, you know, and then how do you build a culture? You know, how do you build a corporate culture? And so it seems pretty obvious. We're taking the concept seriously. You know, I think that people will try, at least in the short term. Companies might try. So I think that, you know, whether it's because they're feeling a recession and they're trying to save costs or otherwise, people will try. And you know, I think we have to up our game. We have to, as we've been saying, we have to make our office experience better, because we're not only competing with buildings down the street, we're going to compete a little bit with work from home. But the last point is, when everyone's at home, it's really pretty simple to organize on Zoom.
Sure.
When half the people are here and half the people are, you know, people are at home, people are not at home, it's really tough. And it's, you know, it's distracting if people are live and you're the one zoomed in, you're totally not connected. And if you want to get somewhere in your career, you're going to want to be part of that. Now, in the short term, there's a pandemic and things are not, it's going to take a while. People need to feel safe. We need to get
Right.
healthy and feel safe.
Right now, it's more of a necessity more than anything else.
When that burns off, there's no question that office becomes what it's been for a long, long time. And we have to do better. And I think this experience will make landlords up their game.
Gotcha.
And it's about edge, as well. So, we're back in the office now, and we were managing before, but being here, how energized you feel, and I feel like the whole team is now thriving again. And there's a big difference between thriving and managing, and I think that's what better companies understand. So that's why I think this whole conversation about work from home is really a blip and nonsense.
Sure. Anybody else have something to chime in? I mean, I feel the same way. That built up capital. That's a great concept, because that's exactly what I thought, is that unless you have these previous relationships that have been developed over time for interactions physically, and you just can't replicate that. I can't see anybody starting from scratch as a career in their career and then developing these long-term relationships that 10, 20, 30 years later are where we are right now. So it's going to be an interesting time for sure, and it's definitely makes people think where we're going to go. Now, Robert, I know you're the architect of the bunch here. Again, I'm going to leave this to you. You're obviously talking to a lot of tenants, and I'm sure they're all scratching their heads and saying, okay, where the future is going to be. And probably you're seeing a lot of what I'm seeing, where you'll have a lot of people sitting on their hands. But what's kind of some of the conversations that have been happening on the tenant side of things? We have our landlords here, but obviously on the tenant side, what do you think? Oop. Oh, it looks like Robert is muted. Are you there? There you go.
Am I back? Yeah.
You're back.
Thanks.
There you go.
It's appropriate because I would just keep talking. I think that's fine.
No problem.
Somebody needs to monitor me. I think that's fine. We can. Well, look, no more needs to be said about going back to work. It's kind of torturing us all. I do think there'll be more, and I apologize. There's construction noise in the background, which is probably why I was muted. But that's our business too. I think I'm not going to disagree with going back to work. What I also see is that we've spent, the last at least 2 decades advanced by multifamily and then followed by commercial real estate, an emphasis on amenities, both within tenant spaces, right? They've been taking more and more space away from their staff to get a smaller footprint. They can afford more rent. If I'm at 50% of my square foot per person, then I can give back 20% with a kind of amenity, and that makes me a little more competitive in the market. And like multifamily buildings have been doing for years, now you guys, the developers, are looking at doing them as well, and the tenants are loving it because it puts a little more of the burden back on them, and it also adds that element of hospitality, which Craig, it sounds like you have down. I really. It sounds like I want to move into your building, actually. That sounds like a great development. But now there's a lot of negative talk about communal spaces, especially these kinds of amenities. And there's such a large investment. So, people are thinking, where's this going to go? And just like return to office, we, over a period of time, I think it'll very much become a return to normal. I think it's the same with amenities. We've spent this much time and money and culture invested in communal spaces. I don't think that's going to change in the long run. In the short term, I actually think they're an incredible way for a landlord to offer additional space to their tenants if needed. I'm thinking of a tenant like Rockefeller Group, well, developer, but also our client. And in fitting out their space, first of all, they allowed for a lot of flexibility, which has worked out well. So they can do an A team, a B team, they can hotel, laptops, cell phones, but they also wanted a larger amenity space and for people to actually use it. Now it turns out that if you want to have a meeting with 10 people, I can't do it in a conference room for 22 because I can only get 8 in there with social distancing. Now I can use an amenity and actually have 10, 15, 20 people safely in one large space. And I would hope that landlords are taking advantage of that as well. Sometimes these are third-party marketing, but I definitely think offering people places to spread out. I've also kind of wondered, well, it's just a sidebar. I've also kind of wondered about unused office space available that's vacant right now, or people who've walked away from a lease, or even co-working spaces. I've wondered if they could help people spread out. I mean, certainly return to office means lower density. But if you culturally you really want people there, then you'd like to see some options.
Sure.
But anyway, with the amenities, outdoor is probably the best, Craig, and as you mentioned. But the issue with the outdoor space is it's seasonal and it's weather dependent. So if I want to plan an event, I'm going to need an interior amenity that's of equal size that I can also, I need a plan B basically. And I'm not sure how far that goes.
So to that point, we've done awnings and then also heaters, so we can at least go through the fall season, which I think does help.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm getting a prompt that we have probably under 4 minutes left right now. We were going to leave some room for some Q&A. There's, let's say there's one Q that we can probably fit in right now. There was a mention of best practices. Who defines them and how are they kept up to date and regulated? Anybody feel that they're up to that one?
I'm going to give it a stab. I mean, I don't know. There's one central keeper. Obviously, there's the CDC, and then New York State actually did a pretty good job. Released a pretty thorough description of how standards of how we should return. Our property management team has been working with vendors and consultants, and obviously our own experience cleaning 15 million feet for 20, 30 years. People. We're tapping into REBNY and hearing what other landlords are doing and collaborating. Someone mentioned in the question queue, what are we doing to clean inside spaces? I think I have this term right, electrostatic.
Static precipitators. Yep.
We're like bombing the space.
Right.
We have returned to the office at 50% capacity on an every other day rotation, but everyone needs to leave at 7. You leave at 7. You don't want to be there when the bomb goes off.
Right.
But it is,
Gotcha.
a deep cleansing, and so so far that's been well received.
Excellent.
Yeah. I guess what I would say is so agree. The CDC guidelines and state guidelines continue to change, and what you're seeing is we stay on top of that for our business, and you'll see that ratchets up as I think we get into this reoccupancy period. You'll also see, I think, science and technology just continue to evolve, and it's revving really quickly for what things you're able to do, because there are a lot of innovators out there adopting old technology or prior technology now to this new end state. So that's, I think, really interesting. I think what happens in this best practice world is you just need to have conversations with lots of people. And in those conversations, that'll inform a lot of how, we all, this group of us, we are thinking about it, but there are lots of opinions out there. And I think every new opinion gets you to a sharper perspective, and you can see where the boundaries are for what you might choose to do or not do. But you should at least have the conversation to figure that out.
Yeah, I think, this, unfortunately, again, while this seems like it's been forever, it's really a short blip in time. But at some particular point, I think somebody's going to need to break everything down to create the playbook, so to speak, as to what do you do, how do we set things up. And like you mentioned, either whether it's REBNY, BOMA, in the mechanical world, it's ASHRAE, at some point, it'd be good to have everybody going down one particular path where we know that, every building is pretty much set up the same way or has a particular standard. So, but, I think we're down to the last minute here. Anybody else have anything to mention or talk about, or One thing I will have to say is that, the first thing, because obviously we have a sizable office as well. Pre-COVID, we were over 180 people. We're probably sitting at about 160 and change right now. But the one thing I didn't want my office to look like is a walking triage with people wearing masks all the time. So a little bit of blatant so we have our own little branded masks, so that it looks a little bit more or less, antiseptic. And to be honest with you, we also gave out these little armbands where it says MGE Strong. It's all green, which means, shoulder pump, fist pumps are okay. Well, elbow pumps, let's put it this way. We also have a red one, which means keep your distance, and a yellow means someplace in between. So more from a psychological standpoint, when you're interfacing with somebody else, you understand where their mindset kind of is. And not that I have any effort or any interest in these things, but it's something that may help the process going forward for certain individuals with their corporations. So, but anyway, gentlemen, thanks for joining and taking your time, giving us all your input. I'm sure that everybody who's listened in has had a great time, as much as I have. Look forward to catching up with each and every one of you, and hopefully doing some more business. And listen, let's all be healthy and safe, and hopefully this time next year it's a memory. So I guess I'll leave it to Nick.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Great. Thanks to our opening panel. We'd like to take a couple of seconds to recognize some of today's sponsors. Great. Our second panel today is Fixing for a Pandemic, the Synergies of Green Building and Post-Pandemic Remediation. It's moderated by Jennifer Racine, a partner at Castlewitz Benson Torres LLP. It features Helena Rose Durst, a principal at the Durst Organization, John J. Gilbert, the CEO and Executive Vice President of Rudin Management Company, Steve Levine, the President and CEO of Atmosphere Solutions, Raul Mulpuri, CEO of View, and Sonu Panda, the CEO of Prescriptive Data. And with that, we'd like to start the second panel.
Good morning. I think we're still in morning, everyone. This is a very interesting panel. I think will dovetail really nicely with the last one. We have both the owners and managers of so many commercial and also residential properties throughout the city that are so important to our vitality, and also some of the leading providers of solutions for us with respect to sustainability and, as it turns out, COVID management. So I wanted to start by asking John Gilbert and Helena if she's on. Prior to this pandemic, we were, I think, looking at how to comply with the Climate Mobilization Act in New York City, and looking for infrastructure upgrades to comply with that law. How has the pandemic changed, if at all, your direction in terms of infrastructure upgrades? And what are your plans in order to address both the law and the current crisis that we're facing?
John, do you mind if I kick off?
Please do.
So it's a real honor to be here, and it's an honor to be presenting with such a great group. I'm looking forward to getting into today's conversation and further talking more about the future of buildings and framing it in today's conversation. I wanted to talk first a little bit to answer your question directly, Jennifer. We're not going to change anything, actually. We have a very strong direction on energy efficiency, sustainability, and the Durst organization since 1999 has been leading the way, including putting solar panels on buildings such as 151 West 42nd Street, then known as 4 Times Square, which was the prototype for LEED certified buildings. So to answer your question, we're not going to be doing anything, but I want to fill that out a little bit more, despite my family's tradition of trying to use as few words as possible. I like to look at things in a way and create analogies. I'm a very simple person. So when I think about buildings, I like to think about buildings in the way that we consume food, actually. And a building is able to consume energy for its main purposes of heating, cooling, and ventilating the air, which I know we'll want to talk a lot more about in relation to COVID-19, but it also needs energy for operating the essential systems of the building, such as elevators and the needs of the tenants. Which again, John, I know is going to be able to get into more detail because his systems have been able to monitor exactly how the tenants use the spaces more so. But keeping really general, a building is able to use 3 separate sources of fuel: steam, fossil fuel, and an energy grid. And it's similar in how we're looking at food. They come from different sources. So steam comes from the Con Ed grid. Con Ed usually generates the steam using fossil fuel, and it's a byproduct of their cogeneration plants. And steam, I think, in the mind of a lot of building owners, is like movie popcorn, palm oil. It's buttery, it's fatty, it's not good for us. We don't design buildings to it now, but it's really hard to get to stop eating and stop using. And then there's fuel, which is fossil fuel heating oil number 2, which we use for heating our systems, and also you're able to use heating oil number 2 to generate steam that's able to generate air conditioning. There's also using natural gas. So there's heating oil number 2, and then there's natural gas. And they come to the building in 2 separate ways. Heating oil number 2 often can be trucked in. Natural gas is something that's piped in. And from the DERS standpoint, and a lot of building owners, natural gas is a very efficient system because you're able to generate electricity directly in your building using a cogeneration plant. Using a cogeneration plant, you're also able to generate electricity for your building or for the grid as a whole, and then being able to use the byproduct of steam for heating and cooling of your building. And then the third major source that we're able to buy in is electricity. Electricity comes from the grid. There's several sources of electricity that we're able to buy, which is mostly fossil, which is generated from the energy products of fossil fuels, nuclear, and hydro, as well as there are more renewable energy sources coming online. But when we look at local law 97, local law 97 is looking for a lot of the renewable energy, such as hydro, solar, and wind. And right now, where that energy is being produced is very far away from what I believe is Zone J, which is what New York is. You can imagine in New York City, we don't have these large solar installations, wind power installations, and other. And DERS has looked excessively at how can we generate our own energy? How can we be using solar panels? And as I mentioned, we've been using solar panels since 1999. What we find with that product, though, is that because our buildings are vertical, not horizontal, it's not as good of a use for the side of a building. We've also looked at producing wind. We've struggled with that. We are very excited about the Ravenswood project that is coming up, and being able to see more wind production coming onto that electrical grid. But generally, going back again to local law 97, we see local law 97 as a bit of an enforced diet, which reminds me of a personal story. My sister's a super healthy person. She eats really well. And one day I decided, you know what, I'm going to do the same thing. And we were eating really healthy for a week. And then finally I had this giant green kale salad. It was the most delicious thing I've ever eaten. Except the next day I got so sick, I had to go see my doctor, who is a world-renowned GI doctor at New York Presbyterian, who when I told her the story, she laughed at me. She said, of course you're sick. Your stomach is just not prepared. Your digestive tract is not prepared for being able to take in and consume all this very healthy food. It was a well-intended thought to be able to start going on this diet, but you just weren't fully prepared. And that's how we see local law 97 right now, and why we're not planning on changing any of, making any major changes as a result of local law 97.
So the reason you feel you're not prepared, if I understand that correctly, is your systems aren't ready to take in the new technology, or just going with your analogy?
No, well, going with the analogy, our systems, and I think it's actually a bigger question. We don't feel that the systems outside of our buildings are prepared for it. I think when the city comes to us and says, well, you should start looking at electrifying your buildings, those are major capital investments and uphauls. And we've been looking at our buildings really since the 90s as it relates to energy efficiency. So one of the terms in the business is constant air volume. And what that means is you're constantly pushing air onto the floor. You're not able to monitor those levels. We've been looking at variable air volume systems since the mid-90s, which allows us to, instead of just turning the light on, it allows us to dim the light or dim the amount of ventilation going onto certain floors. So during this pandemic, we would be able to turn air off to floors that we knew were not occupied. And I know that Rudin's firm has been doing the same and has been able to better explain this due to their app and how they've been looking at cutting and slicing the data, while we've been focused on the hardware and the installation and the capital investment in our systems. And I guess I'm pointing out what's not ready is the infrastructure. Right now, to buy renewable energy is difficult. Right now, all of the systems that we've looked at as it relates to solar, we've looked at anaerobic digestion, which is using food waste to produce methane, which is a gas that would be produced on site that you could then use to run some of your systems. We've looked at wind power and generating power off of our buildings. And what we've found to date is that a lot of these installations, because of their size, it's not enough power, it's not enough energy for our buildings. And so when I'm referencing my doctor, I'm referencing the whole system. The whole system's not fully prepared for local law 97, and local law 97 may have a negative effect to our buildings because it promotes having fewer buildings in the space because it wants you to consume or use less calories.
Got it. Understood. John and Sonny, perhaps you could talk a little bit about data, gathering data in this time period from your building and how it's important in managing your building, both for sustainability reasons and potentially for the pandemic as well.
Sure, happy to do that. And I think it's important to note, Helena's analogy of food, her family is one of the largest organic farmers in the state of New York. So I think it's very appropriate, impressive, B, appropriate that she uses that analogy. And I'll be a little less polite than she is. The reality of local law 97 in the city of New York right now is that we cannot buy, nobody can buy energy at scale. And so that's a huge hole in the food chain, if you will, of energy in the state of New York as we're all trying to get greener. Source energy is key. But we've been very focused, as you've mentioned, Jennifer, in terms of data. And for me, the most important thing property owners can do at this juncture, and if COVID didn't prove it, I don't know what will, is to get your arms around the data that you already collect within your buildings. We need to know how many people are in our buildings. We need to know when they arrive. We need to know which elevator bank they go to. We need to know which floor they go to. We need to know when they go to lunch and when they come back, and then ultimately when they leave for the day. Because if we're not tracking that, then we're really not pushing the data and the services and the experience to where people are. At Rudin, we've cut our electrical consumption by 41%, our carbon by 44%, and our steam by 48%, and yet we still face fines under local law 97. So is the law really about building efficiency, or is it really about source energy? And I think it's the latter. So when we focus on data, we really focus on creating foundational technology. The product is called Nantum. It allows us to see every bit of data that is going on within our building that we're currently collecting, and then allows us to blow up those silos so that those data streams can correlate each other. For people go to lunch, but when you come back from lunch, your office is freezing. And the reason for that is that the same amount of volumetric air that has been conditioned and chilled is being pushed into the space, regardless of where people are there or not. Each of us are like a 100-watt light bulb. We all exude heat. And when we leave the building, that thermal mass, that warmth is gone. So what we do is we basically track that occupancy and ultimately modulate fan speeds. Helena talked about it in terms of variable speed drives within our air handlers and our air distribution system. We're able to modulate that. We're able to dim that, and then as people come back, we track that, and then fans come back. In a single building, that could be as much as a megawatt or a megawatt and a half of electricity, simply modulating fan speed against occupancy. Another example is water. We really need to identify where leaks are, where anomalies are. So this whole concept of buildings having a brain and your data having a place to live is hugely important, because ultimately without that brain, without that data lake, we ultimately can't identify what data sources are correlating or not, and what we can do ultimately between data sets to be more efficient, number one, i.e. save money, and also enhance the experience of our customers. So data is hugely important. You need software to refine that data. People say data is the new oil, but it's really crude oil. And you need software like Nantum ultimately that can make sense of it. I can show you in real time how many people are actually coming into our lobby, which elevator bank they're going to. And now what we're doing is we're giving that data back to our tenants, our customers, so that they know when they get off the subway or off a bus or out of their car, what the lobby condition is in particular buildings, so that they can plan their day appropriately.
And how do you see that data affecting in the short term people's return to the office as they phase in under the governor's orders?
Well, I think it's hugely important. Number one, you need to know if we were at 100% before COVID, where are we today? At what level of energy, what levels of energy are we consuming ultimately to deliver a product? I think it's important that people. I thought for sure that we would have an increase in energy consumption to vacant. It wasn't true. It was only a 30% reduction, and the reason for that is that the work from home and the infrastructure necessary to allow people to work from home actually exists in our office buildings. So in effect, we never shut down, and our tenants' spaces never shut down, because if they did, then no one would be able to work from home. So the ability to take this data, Jennifer, and really give it back to our customers, so that any tenant, any individual at 345 Park is going to know what the indoor air quality is of that building. What is the level of CO2? What is the temperature? What is the humidity? They're going to be able to see that lobby condition and plan their day appropriately, get notifications, and ultimately be able to get into the building without touching any turnstile, or because they're going to be able to use their phone.
Got it. Sanu, I know that your technology is really about sort of getting that data, refining that data, and giving it back to owners and tenants so that they can be comfortable and use their buildings more effectively. Can you talk a little bit about how owner technology is being used both with respect to complying with local law 97 and to combat COVID-19 as we phase back in?
Yeah, absolutely. And it might be helpful to just provide a quick capsule on what is the technology and how it drives these outcomes. So if you'll permit me, just a quick description. So we've built a building operating system, as John referred to it. It's called Nantum. the company's prescriptive data, and it's primarily a very data-centric view towards building operations, as opposed to a hardware-centric view towards data operations, as Helena differentiated earlier in her comments. And what that means is that we try and minimize costs by extracting data from systems that buildings already have, or that building owners and operators have already purchased. We look to, as John said, break down the silos between different types of systems to create a large, usable, and ever-growing data set. And once we have that data set, what we're looking to do is to make sense of it, which is to say that we're looking for positive patterns that we can repeat, if not amplify outright. And we're looking for negative patterns that we can dampen or ideally attenuate altogether. And the idea here is this is not technology for technology's sake. We prioritize the kind of data that we go after based on the business outcomes that our customers are looking for, which starts with a bit of motherhood and apple pie, but then gets very granular. And what I mean by that is our customers, whether they be building owners and operators or whether they be enterprise tenants, are all focused on sort of commonplace metrics. They're focused on net operating income. They're focused on asset value and asset appreciation. They're focused on cost of capital. But then they've got derivative KPIs that are designed to sort of solve for those intergalactic themes. And so when it comes to the pandemic, now there's a whole host of KPIs that are whole building in nature, not just base building related and not just enterprise tenant space related, that are geared towards communicating health and safety and wellness all in real time to create that sense of comfort and well-being that employees of tenants need in order to come back into the workplace. And so what you'll see is sort of a cascading list of KPIs that we're focused on. And it starts with this very simple notion that we're moving from a less data environment to a more data environment. We're moving from data in arrears, which is to say you find out what happened 3 months ago, but you don't have an opportunity to do it, to an environment in which data is in real time. And once you are capturing data with a high degree of granularity and you're capturing it in real time, you have an opportunity to go from being reactive to being very proactive. And so, and then on top of that, when you have an operating system in place that extends beyond just base building spaces and extends into the enterprise space, or vice versa, if you're an enterprise tenant, you've got a system in place that covers your tenanted spaces and that it integrates with the base building, you now have the ability to share data across what I would call traditional borders. Those traditional borders are everything from between the base building and the enterprise tenant, but it's also as it relates to borders that are beyond the building. In other words, sharing information with your insurance providers to reduce risk, interoperability with your local grid to be that much more efficient. Sharing data about just how efficient your building is and how that affects asset appreciation with your financing partners. I mean, we're already seeing buildings with Nantum installed enjoying more advantageous insurance rates. We're already seeing that buildings with Nantum installed have the opportunity to realize financing that's up to 25 bips cheaper than buildings that don't have Nantum. And it all comes down to, once we have all that information, we're able to focus our data centricity on certain outcomes. So as it relates to the pandemic, John talked about some of the functionality that we're providing all around the idea of demonstrating the relative safety of their buildings to their building occupants. And so that means improved communications, telling whether you're an enterprise tenant or whether you're the building, communicating directly with an actual building occupant, whether it's an employee or of the building, an owner or operator, or whether it's an employee of the enterprise tenant. It means touchless access control. So if you can go from the street to the lobby, to the thermal scanning station, to the security gauntlet, to the elevator, and then ultimately into your office without touching anything, that's a facility that we'll provide throughout the Root management portfolio. Similarly speaking, we'll provide what we would call real-time measurement and verification of the building environment, not only for those that are on the operation side of the business, but also for those that are occupants of the building. So you'll be able to pull up your app, the Nantum Tenant app. You'll be able to see composite scores that cover everything from indoor air quality to the presence of CO2 in common spaces, as well as individual tenant spaces. And you'll have a sense at a glance whether you're in a safe environment or not in a safe environment. And then similarly speaking, we've got a bunch of functionality that's designed to help people be aware of the degree to which they are social distancing, the degree to which they're coming to the building when there is less traffic in the lobby, as opposed to showing up when everyone else is showing up and finding themselves in an uncomfortable setting. And then as it relates to the local law 97, we can show our customers today exactly what contributes at a high degree of granularity by energy type to their specific real-time GHG emissions output. So in other words, we can show them exactly how they're doing, and we can show them how they're doing relative to the thresholds that have already been set by local law 97, the 2024 threshold, as well as the 2030 threshold, with the idea being that, to Helena's point, that the market or the industry is not ready yet. We think that situational awareness is the first step, but then once you have situational awareness, you have the opportunity to think deeply about how to prioritize your capital investments in order to ensure that you can inch closer and closer to compliance with the various thresholds that they put in place.
Very helpful. I think Elena wants to jump in quickly before we toss this to Rao and to Steve.
Yeah, I just don't want to be misunderstood. Our hardware, we are able to provide data, and our experience has been when we've been providing that data, tenants have not been interested. So, and John and I we've been talking about this, and we'll continue the conversation. I just wanted to jump in. I know Rhea was going to talk more about view glass, which also is one of the hardwares that Durst uses. So thanks so much.
Okay, so I think we're getting some audience questions about air filtration in particular, and I thought maybe Steve and Rao could talk about this trend towards wellness, which relates to data and transparency in data. But Steve, who is from Atmos Solutions, might have some very timely information for us about, how we deal with COVID in the air right now. And then I think Sanu will tell us about the buildings of the future. So Steve, if you can jump in, talk about air filtration and coronavirus.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. And boy, it's a great honor to be surrounded by the Durst family and the Rudin family and everyone here on this panel contributing. I really believe that it's timely, and people are all wondering, how can we make our buildings better and safer? And what I'm hearing a little bit is on this data, it's turning the invisible visible. And I think that's what we're all trying to do here. Technology is certainly driving today. And as a company, we came from the air testing world. So we would go into all your buildings and we would test air quality, and we would take those 11 different elements of air quality and write that 30-page report and really give an understanding of what your air quality was or is. And so that's how we approach the business. And unfortunately, not everybody wanted to know what their air quality was, because if it was bad, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to fix it? And so we really needed to get onto the solution side of the business. And we looked at everything from filters and UV lights and electrostatic air cleaners, and found this technology over in Europe and brought it over here to the United States. And we really found that, our goal was to try to make a building more sustainable, to make it healthier, to make it better. And how do you do that? You take, particulate out of the air, you measure, what you take out of the air, particles and spores, especially ones that you can't see. I mean, the ones that you can see, that's pretty easy. The particle, the PM10, that floats in the air, when the light hits it right at the right moment, you see those dust particles floating in the air. But it's what you can't see, the PM 2.5 levels, a coronavirus, a 0.1 level, that's the ones that you really have to attack, because those are the ones that, are causing the great damage. So what our technology happens to do is it agglomerates those particles. It makes those particles bigger and heavier and much easier to filter out of the air. That's the key to success, I think, being able to be active. I think we said it earlier, being proactive rather than reactive. I mean, filters are very good, and obviously everybody's focusing on very good MERV filtration. And I know all your buildings have it, you know, but being able to filter and or clean your coils or your drain pan, you know, with the UV lights, that's all good technology, but it's passive in nature. And I think with this type of virus in particular, you have to be active. You have to attack it. And technologies such as ours, and we're not the silver bullet, we're always telling people, you know, you have to wash your hands. You have to clean the surfaces. You have to change your filters and keep your distance. But as one more layer of continuous disinfection, that's what we're trying to bring to the table. And with our technology, what it does to the specific coronavirus, you know, those protein spikes that you see when you're delivering negative and positive ions to the space, it's really saturating the air with these negative and positive ions. And these ions are, you know, when you go to the mountains and you're breathing that clean air, there's a natural conductivity in the mountains, and that conductivity is caused by these negative and positive ions. And when you measure the content in the air in the mountains, it's very plentiful. But when you come down the mountain, these ions have been depleted. And when you're in large cities, it's much less. And when you're indoor environments, because of people and carpet and machines, it's even less. So the idea of saturating, in our case, with these bipolar ions to attach to this virus, to actually penetrate the virus and inactivate the virus, is really what we're all about. And nothing's going to help if people are, you know, face to face, person to person, you know, hugging each other and whatnot. But person touching a surface, or what's in the air, if somebody coughs or sneezes, those droplets that are in the air, you know, saturating the air with these ions or saturating the surfaces with these ions really does make a difference. And, you know, when we tested the technology at Microchem, which is where Lysol goes to test their technology, we got a 99.92 result of defeating the coronavirus in 30 minutes. So that's a pretty big result, but it's not 100%. So it's a combination of things. It's all the things that everyone is doing in keeping distance, washing hands, great filtration, but adding that one more layer of continuous disinfection, continuous sanitization. That's what I think will make our buildings better and safer. And I'm sure there's other ways to do that, but as Sonia said, it's about being proactive rather than being reactive.
So this is such important technology that people are looking, all of these technologies and services are so important. But given the age of so many of our buildings, Steve, how can this technology be retrofitted into existing buildings?
Sure. So, you know, most of our dealings are with retrofits. They're existing buildings. You know, yes, we do new construction, and yes, we get specified all the time by some of the larger engineers and the architects. But it's the older buildings, and it's whether it's the tenant that's asking for it or whether it's the building owner that's saying we need to do it. You know, when you get into those older buildings, you're dealing with older mechanicals, you're dealing with older duct systems. But the beauty is by putting this technology not on the return side of the air. You know, filters go on the return, UV goes on the return, electrostatic goes on the return, trying to capture and grab the particulate. We put our technology on the supply. So we cut a hole in the duct, we put our little bipolar ionization tube in the duct, and when the airflow goes over that duct, it's sending ions into the duct, sanitizing the duct, and then spilling out into the space where people are, attacking the contaminants and what we shouldn't be breathing, and attacking the virus in the space. So whether it's an old system or whether it's a new system, as long as you can put it on the supply side of the air and put it on the supply side of the air handling unit, you can effectively, if you engineer it correctly, you can effectively get the result that we see in Mother Nature. In Mother Nature, you can get between 500 and 1,500 ions per cubic centimeter in natural environments. And our goal is to deliver that same 500 to 1,500 ions per cubic centimeter inside of a building environment. People might ask, what's my ion environment in a building now? And it's probably in the 100 to 200 range. So what we're trying to do is increase that ion arrangement in the building actively, proactively, to create a better natural environment. And by putting those ions in there, we'll combat this coronavirus and actually within 30 minutes, create a 99.92 effect. And that's very powerful today.
Thank you. I think it's incredible technology and so timely. But Rao, I mean, you really made me think last week when we talked about the function buildings will play in the overall push towards wellness and sustainability in the broader market. At this time, what do tenants want in buildings, and how can owners and people who service them help them give tenants the optimized wellness opportunities through their work environment?
Yeah, thanks. I think that is the right question. Let's talk, when we talk about people inside buildings, let's talk broadly about change, right? Change is constant. In fact, change is accelerating. And change in general in society is accelerating because of broadly two things. One, we're learning more and more about our bodies, our biology, our physiology, our biochemistry, our psychology, and that learning is still accelerating. So as you learn more about that, you learn better about how to take care of yourself and how, as Helena pointed out, food impacts your well-being, exercise impacts your well-being, and of course, mental wellness, etc. But in this case, how space impacts your well-being. And then we're learning more about the universe, whether climate change within the earth or other things that are happening around us. As we learn more about the physical world around us, that starts to intersect. And that's where, we go up to the periodic table every day and we look to see what compounds, what elements, what ions, what molecules can help us deal with the things we're learning with our body. So with that as a backdrop and the 50,000-foot view, let's talk about the current pandemic and what it'll do to change, right? I believe what it'll do, like any big perturbation like this, is it'll take what would have been a 10-year time frame and shrink it into maybe a 2-year time frame, because these types of massive events are times of acceleration of change, right? Some of it is forced on us, some of it is regulatory, but a lot of it is because we as human beings are forced to go look at something that we were not open to or willing to look at. So with that, I see 4 major changes, right? One that's been already talked about quite a bit, which is sustainability. Clearly, there will be an acceleration. There has already been an acceleration of, all kinds of things, policy, et cetera, but really people's attitudes. So if you look at corporations, you won't find anybody that doesn't say we're heading to net zero, right? That's just table stakes. If you look at investment managers, many of them are on your island, many of them are now saying we want to invest in non-sustainable businesses. So the entire chain of companies, investors are pushing for this, even apart from the regulatory environment that's talked about. So I think what can we do overall to drive sustainability is, I think, one that's important. The second one is around experience, and let's talk specifically about the office environment. Much like in retail, where we went from transactional to experiential just in the last 10 years, there is an opportunity and I believe a need, because not everyone will now go to the office to transact, because what you would have done to transact in the office, you can actually do from home or frankly anywhere on any device, right? Approve something, push some paper, do some accounting, all that can be done remotely, but you actually go to the office to collaborate, to build culture, to co-create. So the experiential element of certainly offices will change dramatically. Likewise at home, Instead of working maybe 2 hours a week or 5 hours a week at your desk in your home, now you're maybe spending 20 hours a week in a office-like environment in your apartment or your home. So that has to transform too, to be more conducive to creative work and the modern work environment. So that's number 2, is the experience of the person inside spaces. The third one, as you pointed out, is health, and we talked quite a bit about that, and everyone talked about health. There is a huge opportunity for the real estate industry, and that actually excites me the most, where I'll do some did you knows, right? Did you know that you could sleep 30 minutes longer every night without ingesting a drug, without changing your behavior, by simply changing the environment around you in the building? It's what I call the all-in benefit as opposed to an opt-in benefit. You don't have to change a thing, but if everyone understood that, and especially to your point, the end users, the tenants understood that, they would be asking the building owners to start to do things and frankly pay for it, because it has real benefits to health and cognitive function, which has benefits to that business. The industry so far has framed health and such benefits as, yeah, but that's a soft benefit. Can we just talk about how much energy I can save? Well, the problem is, if you only frame the conversation that way, you're going to be stuck in that rut. You never have an opportunity to move the industry from a commodity into a value add. So there's a huge value add on health, and there's actually a ton of medical science, and we're connecting all of the dots from the human biology to the senses we have in the body, to the systems in the building, and then to outcomes for the business, and then health of the people. So if you can do that, there's a huge opportunity. And again, COVID forced that on us. There's a greater awareness of health for all of us. There's a greater awareness of distance and space. So this is going to accelerate that trend, which I think is great for the industry. And finally, technology. This industry has lagged, and it lagged because fundamentally the talent that went into other industries didn't go to this industry over the last several decades. You look at semiconductors, you look at even automobiles, right? This industry hasn't had a lot of talent of the top, universities going into it and innovating around it. The really good news is it's not a lot of invention, it's a lot of adaptation. We can take a lot of things from other industries and apply it here. And I tell people, the smartest things we consume in our day-to-day lives, this is all of us, whether they're in the real estate industry or not, the smartphones are the smartest things we interact with. In between our automobiles, you see that industry moving rapidly, and they're calling it the ultimate mobile device now, right? It's all about tech with wheels on it. But the buildings are the dumbest things we use today. So that's the problem statement, but there's a huge opportunity to drive that change and frankly get paid for it. Since you asked me, what can owners do? There's an opportunity to infuse technology in the buildings and serve the tenants better, and they are willing to pay for those things. So those are the 4. It's sustainability, experience of the human, health of the human, and technology infusion in buildings.
Right. So one of the questions we're getting from the audience, and this is for John and Helena, is are these systems cost effective, and who is going to absorb ultimately the cost of employing these adaptations?
Go ahead, Elena.
Yeah, thanks. I think it depends on what systems we're talking about. So if we're talking something like View Glass, which is something that we've put into our new building systems, it goes into a capital cost. So glass is never cheap, so it's very expensive. And so to the question, are these systems cost effective? It depends on what system we're talking about and the changes that we're looking at. And we're always, Rudin and Durst are always looking at these, what we call the low-hanging fruit as it relates to how can we improve a valve and make sure something's not leaking. So it goes the gamut. It's a big question. It's hard to answer.
Got it.
Yeah,
I understand.
It's a mixed bag, as Helena said. Capital basically is on the owner, unless in certain leases you have clauses which if I put capital in, it reduces my energy spend or cost back to the tenant, and that so it's bag depending upon lease.
So one question we're also getting from the audience is whether owners and managers considered separate air systems for individualized tenants. Is that something in the COVID era that you're hearing a demand for and considering providing?
Well, so at One Bryant Park, we really focused on how the air flows through the building, and so we have floor to ceiling air, which means the air flows up rather than recirculating. And so, looking at air systems, you have to look at it in the larger context of the building. If a tenant, to what John was saying, if a tenant paid for the capital cost of a separate air system, we would do that. And we did go over the MERV levels in the buildings, and for Class A office space, you have very, very high MERV levels. But again, if a tenant requested a new system and there was a capital cost, that would go back to the tenant.
There's another question that we're getting about energy sources, and Helena, you had mentioned the various energy sources. Somebody was asking about the availability of ground source heat pumps. Is that something that has been or will be used?
We've looked at ground source heat pumps, and I think that they can offset the offset the cost. And what I'm thinking about is that it can set off a portion of the cost for a building like One Bryant Park, One World Trade Center, these large Class A office spaces. We're using a tremendous amount of power. We have about 13,000 occupants in the space in a year. And so looking at it, it really is a tremendous amount of space. And so it's essentially a tremendous amount of energy, in a small space. And it can be the same amount of energy consumption as a town. So a single geothermal pump or ground source heat pump only offsets a small portion of that energy use.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's all about scale. I think in small residential buildings, new construction, you can ultimately see a use for that where the load isn't very much. But you know, Rudin's like Durst. I mean, our peak load is 30 megawatt. That's a huge amount of electricity, and the heat pumps could never ever meet that demand.
So in terms of the technology, Steve, there's questions being asked about whether there's any energy saving that's associated with Atmosphere's product that it offers. Is that something that you can talk a little bit about?
Sure. I mean, I think what's most important, is cognitive function, right, of the employee or the tenant, who's ever in the space. Improving cognitive function, reducing absenteeism, improving productivity, increasing retention. I mean, those are all good things you get being a sustainable, building, and focusing on clean air, and specifically in my case. But if you're recycling cleaner air, and you're not and you're not having to increase your MERV filtration because you're recycling cleaner air, and you're able to monitor and measure your particulate reductions and such, think about not having to use as resistant of say a MERV 14 filter, or such, and you can even reduce that in combination with the technology where the fan doesn't have to work as hard. Therein lies a nice amount of energy savings. And even in some buildings where you're recycling clean air and they're bringing in an overabundance of outside air, ASHRAE says if you have an air cleaning strategy where you're monitoring and measuring the contaminants of concern, you might not have to bring in as much outside air. And when you think about the heating and cooling costs, therein lies another opportunity. So, all of these opportunities help reduce the carbon footprint, help reduce the energy costs, and obviously help create a cleaner, healthier environment. And so that's how I would answer that question. And again, not getting off the health and wellness part of it, if you can do both, if you can really create a cleaner, healthier building and you can do so by reducing some energy in those areas, you know, I think then eventually it pays for itself.
I think we're just about at the end, but are any closing comments from the panelists? It's been so helpful.
Jennifer, the one thing that I'd offer up as an adjunct to what Steve had just said is that you know, the root purpose, especially in a commercial office building, but certainly relevant to other types of asset classes as well. The root sort of, I'm not sure what the right word is, but sort of the root cause of the need to have a healthy environment is people, right? Is the presence of people and how they use the building in question. And so, you know, I think in response to the person that had asked the question about whether or not indoor air quality sensing and sensors can help calculate your energy savings, you know, I think it's important to remember that those are technologies that exist because of people, and that fundamentally knowing how and where people use the space and therefore use energy is potentially a very high leverage way to tackle the question of energy efficiency of buildings and improvement of sustainability of those buildings.
So Jennifer, if I could just add, the term, you know, energy use intensity, it's been defined as energy consumed per square foot. And I think that just is one slice on what the building is doing to the points that are being made. Then if you can put more people per unit area, you know, you should really look at energy use per person. And then if you want to take it a step further, if that person is able to get more done, whatever the done is for the benefit of that company or the city or the society, that should be taken into account as well. Where I think the narrow definition of the way the energy use intensity is being looked at is, I think, a bit unfair and probably misses the point a bit. So if you start to go step it up from, if I can put more people and I can help them get more done, then that should be recognized in how we think about sustainability.
Amen. Well said.
This is a fantastic panel, and I feel like a discussion that we're going to continue to have for a bit into the future. So thank you everybody for joining. I'm not sure if there's any more questions, but I think we're at the end of our hour.
Jennifer, thanks for moderating.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks all.
Jennifer.
Good to
Thanks,
see you all.
everyone.
Looking
Stay
forward to
safe.
seeing everybody in an office soon.
Great. And before we start our final panel, we'd like to quickly acknowledge Ascenius, one of today's program sponsors. Great. I'll be serving as the moderator for our final panel. It's on Reconstruction Flex, redefining the need for co-working and flex office spaces. And I'm joined by Lakan Bashua, the Director of Product for Convene, Mark Furness, the CEO for Ascenius, Thais Ghali, Managing Director for Tishman Speyer, and Edward Shinanovic, co-founder and chairman of Notel. And I'm sorry if I butchered anybody's name or company's name, but thank you all for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Hi.
Great. Well, you know, sort of, I guess the question on everybody's mind is sort of what's the flex market going to look like coming out of the coronavirus pandemic? How is demand for flex products going to change?
Do you want anyone to just kick off?
Yeah, just sorry, I should have probably mentioned that, but yeah, just jump in, keep it open.
I think Notel has the benefit of operating around the world. We're in 20 different cities, and different parts of the world went into quarantine earlier than others. I think for us it was Paris and Germany that started before New York and San Francisco, and it's a bit of like having a time machine. So we, if what happened in Paris or London or places like Berlin and Frankfurt is a predictor of what will happen in the U.S., then we're seeing tremendous demand in Germany and in Paris. It's certainly picking up in London, but in a place like Paris, we're back to pre-COVID levels, and the demand is very strong, and it's a little different than it was before. So people are looking for very specific use cases for space, and I think we're starting to see somewhat of a demand pickup in New York. San Francisco is lagging simply because the situation is there more difficult. But I think we will have a good second part of the year in terms of demand. And I mean, you all know the statistics. If you look at the numbers and listen to large corporates, they all want to be 25-30% flex within the next few years, and I mean, all of us will be there to address that demand.
Yeah, I can jump in just to add to what Ed mentioned. I agree. I think we have seen it starting in China and then going through Europe as well, and then the demand picking up. We have the benefit of being both a landlord and also an operator. For those that don't know, Studio by Tissue Inspire is Tissue Inspire's flex platform. And I would say almost every tenants that we have talked to recently, and also brokers and potential new tenants to our buildings, have mentioned that they're going to increase the percentage of their real estate needs that are going to be flexible. Is it co-working or a dedicated flexible platform? But they're really looking to change how they look at their real estate mix. And that is both to have a portion of the real estate that is more flexible, but also to give their employees options and other locations to work from. So I think that there is the angle of flexibility, but there's also the angle of providing employees with more options and places to work from. I would say the other two changes that I expect to see, and we have been hearing in the market as well, is a flight for quality. We have seen some new tenants, new demands, new members for our spaces that are looking to focus on high quality spaces, especially as those are shared spaces. So they want to make sure that they're safe, that their employees are safe when they come to the workspace, especially because they're sharing the space with other companies. And I would say the last thing is really a change in how the spaces are designed, right? I think that we're all still going to learn about it, but we have already seen social distancing changing how we think about meeting rooms, changing how we think about technology, which is more and more important now. And more than that, changing how we think about community building, which is much more virtual now, but how can you still do that despite being in a co-working space?
And for the places where, countries where people have started to come back, I mean, have they been sort of, resistive towards leaving their home to coming back to your spaces, or, have they been sort of excited about getting out of their apartments?
Well,
I think Nick,
Oh, sure.
Sorry, Edward. Yeah, no, I was going to touch on that. So as a census, we have, we're the technology behind a lot of the flexible workspace sector. We've customers in 21 countries. And I think there's a difference between current occupancy versus demand for the product. I think occupancy, is very, very variable across lots of different markets. There's lots of local drivers, but I don't think that talks to the demand for the product. I think this is a real catalyst moment for the industry, and the demand drivers that we knew were sort of driving growth for the sector, really only going to accelerate post-COVID. So I think that drive for flexibility, more agile real estate products, things that support the ways of working, which will become the new normal, are going to be critical. It's going to be supported by technology. It's going to have a much bigger involvement from landlords and asset owners. And you'll see that very much so, you'll see the expansion of networks and platforms across the industry to sort of deal with the enterprise demand. So I think demand drivers really strong. I think near-term occupancy really challenging.
I agree, but I would say that in Germany, which probably is the place that dealt the best with COVID, we have seen, which therefore might be an exception, we have seen occupancy be close to 45% at this point, which is very different from what we're seeing here in the US, where occupancy, I think that as Mark just mentioned, demand, we see it coming back, but occupancy definitely not, is still very low. And I would say that even China took a bit longer than Germany took to really come back to the space. So I think that people are excited to go back, but it depends on how much they trust that it's safe for them to do so. So we're seeing a difference in regions and countries.
Yeah, I think it's also a question of the usage of the space. So why do people actually need office? So the question that that went through people's minds was first, how do we come back after we've left? And that was your question. I mean, do people really want to come back? Are they excited about it? We're seeing in many companies, more junior staff really wants to be in the office. And it's a matter of going up the corporate ladder. It's a matter of showing face, showing dedication. Managing directors of banks want to stay away and join through conference calls. But there was this idea of how do we actually come back to offices? What does that office look like? How do you make it virus-free? Or how do you make it safe? What are the different health considerations that you need to bring in? Then the question is, does that office really, does the office that I currently have address my needs, or do I need to rethink my real estate strategy? But more important, the key overarching question, I think, is what does that workplace of the future look like? And is it about the office, or is it more about workplace? So do companies really need office of the past, where you had different types of work in that office and everyone needed to be there? Where we're hearing some companies say that they want to be remote first. And we're really thinking about this from the perspective of workplace first. What is this? What is the need of the office? And just like with retail, the use case of the office is changing. The use case of retail has changed, and we have seen over the last 10 years, and it's now with COVID will be further accelerated. It's really turning the retail locations into showrooms. And I think we will see something like that happening in the office as well. Like the idea, we're exploring this idea of office as a showroom. It may not be a perfect metaphor, but it's a place where companies can showcase their culture, can invite partners, customers, and so on. So there's this idea of changing use case of the space.
I'll jump in here for a second. You know, we see it in two different ways almost, right? There's sort of a survive and thrive mentality, right? So on one side, companies coming back to the office for us has been sort of, think of it almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Where you have to solve sort of the basic like physical and psychological safety concerns, right? So we've done that in multiple ways, you know, new operating standards, protocols for cleaning, all the basic things that you've got to do. And then making sure that people feel safe coming back to the office involves more than just the cleaning, you know, portion of it, but also all the physical changes we've made to the spaces and things like that. In our case, because we also operate, you know, meeting locations and things like that, it's gone all the way down to culinary standards, thinking about that and rethinking what it means when you show up to the office and staying there for the whole day. What do you need to feel safe and comfortable in the office? How do you interact with your peers in the office and so forth? Even down to us thinking about sort of transportation and what it means to get to the office, who will feel safe getting on a subway and things like that. And so that sort of handles the one side of getting ready to come back to the office. I think to Edward's point, we've been thinking deep about sort of this basic question, almost, and if you think of Clay Christensen's question of like, what's the job to be done? You know, we've kind of leaned into that to really think about sort of the office, not just about workplace, but in our case, we think about workplace meetings and we think about productivity, right? And if you do that and you reimagine what it means for like coming back to the office, what office are you coming back to? In our case, we're thinking about it in almost sort of, what's your primary headquarters or the place you work every day? What is your in-between or third space that you might visit? And then ultimately, what's your home version of that as well? And so we're leaning into at home. We're thinking about how to make your home office super productive. We're thinking about your main office. And then ultimately, when it comes to sort of what we all do every day, meetings, thinking about what's the virtual version of a meeting and how do we help enable that happen better? What's the physical version? And then finally, hybrid, right? How do you then connect all of these different journeys into one simple experience? So we're leaning into the entire thing to say, what does it mean to be productive during the day? Where do you do it? How do you do it? And how can convene be part of that glue? And one of the big things, of course, is, Mark said it, it's technology. It's about digital transformation. It's about thinking about all of the tools and all of the touch points that people interact with, and designing all of those things with the user in mind, with the landlord in mind, and ultimately thinking about the company versus the individual employee. So we're exploring the entire thing and reinventing our entire business to sort of respond to that entire stack.
You mentioned, that Convene, runs a lot of meeting spaces. I mean, is there demand now for, meeting spaces, for people actually like getting together in sort of these enclosed rooms? And if so, like, what are some of the steps you've taken to sort of make them safe?
Yeah, so it's a bifurcated story, right? So on one side, our largest meeting locations are essentially empty, mainly because we're still in the reopening process in the U.S., right? So you can only kind of open as you're allowed to. There's that aspect. There's still demand for some clients where initially we didn't see a ton of cancellations. A lot of it was everybody was moving meetings out, right? Over time, as people are discovering COVID is here longer with us, it started to shift to, well, what else can we do? And this is where we start leaning on Convene's strengths, right? So as things are shut down, we started standing up an entire virtual meetings platform that says, hey, you've got this exact meeting. Let's convert it to a digital version of that meeting. And then let's add some of the secret sauce that makes Convene, right? So in our case, if you were having a meeting and at the end of it, we would serve drinks and things like that. Now we've moved to a model where we'll deliver drinks to your entire team remotely, and you can have that cocktail hour. You're just doing it over Zoom, right? And so we've started doing those things. But then we started thinking about, as people come back and want to sort of come back to physical space, because of the, de-densification of those spaces, we're in a lucky position of having multiple spaces in multiple cities. So, and most of our spaces have broadcast quality equipment and production staff to make that happen. So you marry our virtual meetings platform with our physical spaces. If you needed 50 people, instead of one location, maybe we can do it over 3 or 4 rooms in the same building and then pull everybody together virtually. Or we could do that across the city or across the entire country. And so, we've looked at that as an opportunity to actually lean in and help the client rethink, maybe people don't all have to travel to New York for that big meeting. Maybe we can connect New York, San Francisco, and DC into one meeting and achieve the same outcome in a different way.
And with all, sort of this, demand increasing and, some larger companies talking about sort of shrinking their office space, have landlords been more willing to sort of, have discussions with you and sort of develop partnership agreements to, give some space to flex than they were, before this pandemic sort of really got going?
I mean, this is one of those stories where, I think we need to first of all pay deference to like what's happening right now. There's a lot of economic destruction, but more importantly, lives being lost, right? That you have to sort of step back and kind of appreciate that moment. But if we're honest about sort of the opportunity for us with landlords, it is actually an accelerant, right? What COVID has done has made anybody who's not thinking about flex is not really being strategic and thinking about the future. The future is becoming, it's hybrid, it is virtual, it is digital, it's about resiliency and the ability to adapt, right? It's all these things that if you don't have flex in your portfolio, you're basically a dinosaur, right? So all the conversation with landlords actually is accelerating, right? And so that's a positive thing. What's interesting is as you start to sort of imagine what those conversations become, we're having a lot of conversations around sort of thinking about management service agreements with landlords and so forth. But we're trying to do that from a position of reimagining what the product that we developed together with them looks like, right? And really it's about thinking about what the client is talking about, because most of the conversations with landlord come from the demand of the client, right? If you take like the example with Facebook made this big announcement of everybody can work from home like many companies. Everybody hears that and thinks, well, that means no office. On the contrary, what they did is that only an employee who has been at the company for a while can actually take advantage of that, one. Two, they're hiring in clusters by cities. And so what the solution starts to look like is a version of some part of workplace, some part of meeting space, some part of work from home, all mixed together into a unique solution. So from a landlord's perspective, giving that client flexibility of what that space looks like, how it feels, how it's built, how it's delivered, how it's operated, are all things landlord needs. And what's interesting is it's becoming so complex to deal with all of those things that increasingly our landlord partners are saying, you know what, it makes sense to work with someone like Convene, because also the client is looking for a flag carrier, right? They're looking for a brand to kind of layer on top of that building. And so for us, it's all really interesting, positive conversations.
Yeah, we're seeing absolutely the same thing. And it is the complexity of interactions. It is dealing with, it's this idea of moving away from thinking about your workplace as something physical to thinking about it as a network. And as I mentioned, first it was about how do we go back? If in some cases, it's just how do we go back to our space and just get the stuff that we left there on March 13th or 14th or 17th or whenever the quarantine started. And then it's rethinking the real estate strategy. So we're seeing companies want to look at quality spaces, as Thais said, but maybe smaller spaces, and have a network of smaller spaces on the periphery of cities, not necessarily in the center. So in Paris, we're looking at, we're working on a number of opportunities for companies that want to give up some of the space in the center of the city and move to the periphery. And in New York, some companies want to move to Long Island City or have a small, like a beacon location there or something in Hoboken. And same in London and in other places to optimize for people's commutes. But really, it is about developing an integrated solution. One of the horrible experiences that we've been working with in the past is having a part of the group be virtual and a part of the group be in the physical space. And right now, we're all in this virtual space. We're all looking at each other. It's actually really interesting. It's the first time, well, it's not the first virtual panel I'm on, but it's the first time you can actually have a different experience with your panelists. You can actually see the panelists that you're talking to, which we didn't have before. Before we're all set in a row. So this is much more interactive. It's actually a much better experience because you're talking to each other. But what this virtual platform does is it equalizes everyone. But if some of us were sitting in a physical space in a group and we needed to collaborate, we would not be on the same footing. So how do you actually, there's an amazing opportunity that we're exploring. How do we actually make the technology at Notels address those needs, address an integrated environment? And as Lacan mentioned, we're also thinking about homes, where how do we make that home office environment be as productive as possible? Because if companies were spending, like Global 2000, we're spending $10,000 to $15,000 a year for providing workplace to each one of their employees, for 100% of their employees, that will probably go down overall. But they will spend some budgets. We're seeing them allocate budgets to providing better experience overall. So providing certain budgets for, as Lacan mentioned, delivering drinks to them at their home locations, or doing something else, maybe a better computer, maybe better audiovisual equipment, maybe some soundproofing. So we will see a shift in corporate workplace budgets from pure real estate to a more integrated, more distributed platform. And I think flex operators and flex networks will benefit from that. This is the age of platforms, and there will be owners that will try to build their own platforms, and there will be owners that will try to partner with others. And we're seeing good conversations in Europe because it has reopened with many of our landlord partners, but also new regions where owners and large financial institutions are coming to us and exploring the idea of bringing Notel to their properties in the Middle East or India or Japan or Singapore, where Notel hasn't existed, and just bringing these dedicated, tailored spaces with all the right health and safety considerations, with all the best practices that we've learned from years of working with the Global 2000 to new regions. So they definitely see this as a shift from just pure real estate to real estate that's being operated and primarily being operated by professional operators.
Yeah,
And
and
you,
I'll
oh,
come
sorry.
to the landlord point of view.
Yeah, that's
because
actually what I was just about to ask you. You know, I know Tishman got into this sort of before all this and all the sort of demand. I mean, do you expect, I mean, have you been talking to other landlords who are looking sort of launching their own platforms, and how difficult was it to do?
So I would say that you definitely need the size and the scale from my point of view to make this viable because of the economies of scale and everything else that you need to benefit from. But we always believed in it. We believe in it even more right now. We have 500,000 square feet already developed and another million under consideration. And we have definitely seen other landlords that have either come to us and asked if we would be willing to work with them and bring studio to their properties because they trust us, they know what we're doing, and they appreciate the alignment between the landlords and the co-working space to really bring the co-working space or the flexibility to build a full ecosystem in the building. And with that, I mean companies that are looking to have 70% of their lease be traditional, but 30% be flexible. But they would really appreciate and they prefer to work with one partner instead of having to work with multiple ones. The way that we look at it when selecting which floors we are going to put the flex spaces on, normally prioritizing more challenging floors so that you optimize the value of the asset at the event of a sale. Really also being careful about how much you put in there as well, depending on where the capital markets is, so that you're also thinking about the price in the event of a sale. But I would say more than that, being able to manage the full experience from the moments that your member walks through the door of the building to when the member is grabbing a cup of coffee inside the co-working space and having that consistent experience that is not different depending on who the operator and who the landlord are, has been something that we have also heard that is important to them. So I think that with all of that, yes, we did always believe in it. We believe in it even more now. Almost every landlord as well that we have talked to, with very few exceptions, have said that they do believe that they need to find a way to add flex. And again, I think that for some few ones, it makes sense to develop it in-house. For others, it really makes sense to partner, because if you're not an operator, like we already were in terms of property management and other businesses that we have, it's a very different business going from traditional real estate to really being inside the tenant space, managing the experience, managing their everyday, managing their technology, and managing everything else.
I would, you know, I would say I think it's actually much harder today. You know, COVID accelerated everything, right? So I think the landlord or the building owner who thinks they want to operate this, you know, I think everything you described is correct, but I think the problem is much larger than that today, right? That if you're worried about scale and logistics and can I buy furniture at a good price and so forth, you're probably solving pre-COVID problems, right? The post-COVID problem is even broader than that. It's, can you deliver 1,000 desks to 1,000 people's homes across 10 cities on behalf of your client? Can you deliver a technology stack that allows them to get in and out of meetings in a simple and efficient way? Can you deliver food, beverage, nourishment to homes? Can you get them to and from meeting locations where they're physical and hybrid in a way that is consistent, it's with quality, the welcome experience when they show up is mediated by technology, it allows for contact tracing and so forth. Can you envision, you know, do you have a team of technologists, user-centered, you know, user researchers, user-centered designers who can conceive of sort of interior design solutions all the way down to the right app to, you know, that's intermediating that entire experience? Conceive of a bundled price that makes it super easy for the customer to purchase and buy real estate almost as though they're buying software, right? Like that is a fundamental shift in the interaction with space and what it means to be agile. And I don't think most, you know, a lot of commercial real estate is thinking that way yet, right? So for us, we have to go through this idea of like complete digital transformation to really reimagine what our business is going to be in the future. What was interesting is when we look back at our notes, COVID basically pulled what we thought was 5 to 10 years out into today's strategy. And that's what we're starting to execute on. So, I'd almost suggest that it's fundamentally more complicated today than it was 6 months ago. And that,
1,000%. Yeah, I fully agree. I think that the way that we talk about Tishman's approach real estate might be a bit different in the sense that though what you're mentioning, working with our tenants, working with our members to really service them at home is something that we're not only doing for our co-working members, but we do it throughout our properties for our tenants as well. So since COVID started, we've been on the phone, we've been working, we actually doubled our tech team to really think about how can we really help our tenants be effective at a time when they're working from home. And right now, how can we help them for those that are ready to come back? How can we help them come back or have a mixed solution where they have the tech and they have the infrastructure that they need at home for those that are not going to come back, and for those coming back, as you were mentioning before, making the whole process seamless, from like transportation to really entering the building, to how you think about your HVAC, to how you think about community, which we do a lot of this through Zoe, which is our amenity platform. So I 100% agree with you. I think that it accelerated something and the importance of thinking through the whole experience and not just the workspace.
Yeah, it just changed the dynamics. I think it shone the light. It was Flex before COVID was real estate with operations and with technology, and Flex after COVID is technology and this idea of workplace first with some real estate.
And speaking of sort of the tech aspect, I mean, what are some of the new things that have been put in place to sort of help make workplaces more COVID safe? Maybe you can address this one, Mark.
I think that, listen, we are right in the middle of the heart of this pandemic globally, and I think a lot of this will reverse out on the other side of this current pandemic, because I think there is a significant cost to a lot of these things, these initiatives, the way we're thinking about extending home working and becoming more multimodal in terms of how we work. And I think there's going to be a near-term challenge for many businesses, quite frankly, just to survive. So I think there's a cost to all of these things, densification, very different ways of working. And I'm interested to see how it all pans out on the other side. I think the key thing that we all know, I think we all agree on this panel, is that flexibility, is going to be the primary driver. So agility in all sorts of commitments in business, whether they be onerous 25-year leases. Quite frankly, I think they're dead. So, long-term commitments that really don't give you any agility in the business. I think the second part of this is how technology enables this and what technologies are going to be important. And there's going to be technologies that are going to be managing your occupancy, managing access to this. I know as a census, we just launched the smart access technology to try and, remove friction in that whole user journey, that whole experience. So layer the experience onto the environment. And everything's going to be about immediacy and on-demand services. So you're going to see a lot of technology-led innovation in the near term, because actually it can take out touch points of the whole customer journey. I think that's going to be critical as well to the development of these platforms, because I think there's very few landlords with the capacity or capability of Tishman Speyer. It is I might be controversial here, but it's not a dark art to run a flexible workspace business. I think people get a little confused. It's a dark art to run it successfully, profitably, and at scale. Is a layered operation on top of a space. But I think there's the whole of the real estate community is clear. The why is because it's driven by demand. The occupiers of the future and now will need much more from their space providers. They will need spaces that can cover requirements requirements and needs. They'll need space that conferencing, meeting rooms, private offices, they'll need cross, even cross-border. And for the biggest enterprise, they'll look for the platforms and the networks will be critical, and scale will. All of that's going to be enabled by technology. And I think those people who've invested in the technologies that provide this, those people that have put digital first in how they build their businesses, Notel, Convenience, Inspire, these are all brands that we know are very at the forefront of digital enablement. They're going to be the ones that win, and they're the ones that can drive efficiencies in their operations, create better customer experiences. But I'm unsure as to how far we go into reach to the end consumer. I'm not sure whether we'll end up in the homes shipping that. I think we'd love to, but I'm not sure how that develops, to be honest. I think that's a big ask to a stretch at the moment.
Mark, I wonder, are you seeing, here's what we're seeing, right? We're starting to, we have to talk more, technology and digital transformation started because our customers were essentially pulling us to home, right? So we had to start thinking about solving that problem. Yet the moment you start doing that, it exposes other issues, right? For example, security has become much more of a concern, and we're talking more to IT now because, now there's a lot more phishing attacks and things like that happening at the home. So our, the corporate technology that we're implementing, we had to beef that up. At the same time, because we're now going from home to third space to headquarters to home, interoperability across the board in terms of all the different technologies that you use, all of a sudden we had to start thinking about that in a different way. When it comes to, people being welcomed there, carrying their smartphone as the primary means of interaction, and then all of the things you might order in our spaces. So for us, it's been just watching users and watching what's happening. And I guess I'm curious kind of what you're seeing as it comes to that and the clients you're working with.
Yeah, I think you got to remember who your customer is. Your customer is going to be primarily buying real estate products, and you are a checkbox for enterprise IT teams. There are certain, in the environments you offer, there are checkboxes that are really important around your digital security, your privacy, your compliance, how you do that. If you don't tick those boxes, you're not going to attract those enterprise type customers. And I think this is a challenge for IT about how they deal with homework. It's been for many years their big worry, and VPNs and security across the internet. And to be honest, just the quality of the experience. I don't know about you guys, but I'm seeing a lot of jitter on this call, like the things dropping off, and half the words are occasionally missing, which is a good thing sometimes if I'm speaking. But I think the reality of all of this is the technology at home, broad-based internet services that we have, it's still not quite there in most markets. So I think we've got a way to go there. I think one of the key things we miss is the physical requirement of being near to each other, the social requirement, the increase in productivity and creativity and innovation that brings. I look at my business. I look at a business which is much more efficient when we're in front of a whiteboard, when we're working on problems together, when we're looking and we can respond and riff off people. And I think the spaces we're going to be thinking about in future are going to be designed purely around productivity. It's going to be, how do we make these businesses more efficient, more effective? Unless, and quite frankly, them have to worry less about real estate decisions for 25 years. They're going to partner with people. Businesses are going to partner with Inspire, with Notel, with Convenience, say, hey, you've got this for us. You tick all our boxes. And we'll go on that journey with you. So I think, it's very different. We're in a very different time at the moment. Technology is only one part of the equation, although obviously I would say it's a very important part. It's as much about the environment and the experience as well as the technology. I think those three are really key.
And so, yeah, I'm getting the 10-minute warning here. So, right before we jump into the Q&A, just real briefly, obviously we're, everybody's seeing increased demand, but, there's been, a couple of months of pain, unfortunately, layoffs, salary cuts. Do you expect there to be, some players that aren't going to be able to make it through this? Obviously there's a very large one that everybody's questioning right now. And what are what do you need to do to be able to sort of survive this sort of middle ground before the demand starts coming?
Great question, Nick. I mean, I think we're seeing some clear things, right? Number one, not everybody will make it, right? There's some pragmatic things you've got to do to survive, right, before you can thrive. And we had to do all the things you would expect, right? You renegotiate leases, you have conversations with landlords, you do all of those things. And we did layoffs like everybody else did. What we had to do very quickly was start to think about the Thrive strategy, though, right? And start to ask ourselves, what the fundamental new problems you want to solve are, and figure out what the path between here and there is, right? So for us, that's thinking about all the assets we have today and how do you turn those into digital assets that companies can benefit from today and get value out of. And then asking ourselves and comparing sort of the options they have out there to, what are the problems they have and how do we map against those things immediately? And then the next thing is starting to think about hybrid in a way that says, leverage all of these assets to, as people start to come back into physical space, what does that mean? Whether that's in a workplace setting or that's in a meeting setting, right? And then ultimately navigate your way back to really what is a platform conversation about fundamentally rethinking your real estate strategy more around productivity, work, and what the outcome is, and starting to map our business against what companies will need, right? And so for us, we think the players that make it are the players that rethink their entire business by, number one, thinking of what the customer needs. Number two, grounding themselves in what are those immutable things that are part of their business that they don't want to change. For us, we are a work brand. We're known for work productivity, a great place to meet, get work done, right? That will never change. But how you do it, where you do it, what Convene brings to the table, how you buy it, who we sell to, the entire thing we're thinking about in a different way. And we're leading it with digital transformation at its base. And then, the things that made us who we are, hospitality, thinking about it from a standpoint of design, and design not just of the physical space, but ultimately design of the entire experience. We've invested in our back-end systems, in our design technology. And so I think those are the things that you have to look at every player and say, are they doing all of these things? Are they hiring a new group of people into the company that can help reimagine their commercial real estate strategy? So that's what we've been doing. And I think the companies that make it will fundamentally have to do the same thing.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say, I think that like any other crisis, we should expect some consolidation. Some companies will make it, others will not. I think that that's just natural for any industry. I would say that to your second question, Nick, about what would make some of them successful or not. I think it's really thinking about not just growth, but sustainable and profitable growth. That's always been a focus for us. And we were lucky to barely have to let go of people from our staff. It was just performance driven, but most of our team is still with us. So really being focused on building something that is aligned, sustainable, and not just focus on growing and getting a larger footprint. I would also say, to the points that Ligon was mentioning before about management agreements and looking at us in terms of being the landlord and also the operator. I think that the previous model of signing leases and having the mismatch of a long-term lease with a set rent with short-term leases is something that I expect to exist less and less in the future. I do believe that management agreements make a lot of sense. And I believe even more that having the landlord be the one doing this makes a lot of sense, because you don't have that mismatch and you can really use that part of your space as dynamic pricing to keep your occupancy and really go with the market. When the market is great, you're probably making more. When the market is not so good, it's okay, you adjust the pricing, but you do not have that obligation, that rent obligation. You have your focus on profitability, but you can really use the space and keep your occupancy higher.
Great. And so on to the Q&A. Not sure if we'll get to all of them, but so the first one is, has the usage of amenity spaces changed, and are users wanting less communal spaces or the same? And have you sort of shifted your plans for any of those spaces based on that?
Well, I can take that because it's an easy answer for me. I mean, as we don't have shared space, unlike Convene or unlike Tishman Spire, all of the spaces are dedicated. Except we have a business in France, which is similar to Convene's business, just meeting rooms. And since Paris is the fashion capital, there's a lot of fashion usage. And that business has been coming back slower than the core business. We're seeing more demand for core hotel rather than meeting spaces, because people are meeting less in the virtual world, less in the real world. And as we're having this conversation, they're also having lots of conversations on Zoom. And I think that we will move away from this word amenities, just in general. It will be just more core workplace, and that workplace will have different kinds of usage. It all boils down to the workplace use case. And we've most of the work that was happening before COVID was in offices, was focused work, and less so collaborative and social. And now that collaborative and social will take the front stage, and the focused work, a lot of it will be done at homes.
I tend to agree a lot with you, Edward, but I would take just a little issue in that I think in our view.
Well, of course, that was pointed at you.
I mean, and here's the thing that we've even noticed, right, is that work, the word workplace for us, it's actually about work and productivity, and it's also about engagement, right? Now we can work from anywhere, but anywhere doesn't actually work, right? And so what we've leaned into and will continue to is think about whether it's an amenity space or a meeting space or it's a workplace, is thinking about the work that needs to be done and designing the space for that particular outcome. And that space might be digital or it might be physical, right? And I think the biggest thing to keep in mind there is that culture is developed in many different ways. It's around shared experiences. Most of us are drafting off the culture we built pre-COVID in this digital world. And so we still believe physical space has a place. How you interact with it, at what cost, and how you share it will be different, right? And the types of amenities or these extra spaces will be different. And so, for us, it's about more and different, not this versus that. And so we think the world is that it's going to be different, but you're going to need a lot of different types of spaces going forward. We still believe in that.
Yeah. Very different spaces for different use cases. Sure. Whether a company is looking for a regional headquarters, or it's project-based, or it's their IT division or innovation division, we will be talking a lot more about the use case, just like we do with software or hardware. It's not just real estate. It's different forms of workplace, and real estate is one of the components of that workplace.
And do you expect that the demand, for the flex office is going to return to the levels before coronavirus or exceed it?
It will exceed it, definitely. I mean, we need to, it has already, as everyone has said, that we are 5, maybe 7, maybe 10 years in the future because of COVID in terms of demand. So it will happen much faster. Long leases are history. No one is going to sign a 25-year lease or a 10-year or even a 10-year lease. How does a 10-year lease align with your business strategy when you can only plan for the next 2 years, maybe?
And a 10-year lease in a white box that has nothing else with it is the most dangerous place to be in the future.
Yeah, I think that it's a mix. I do definitely expect flex should be a much larger part of our portfolio or any landlord's portfolio. So I do expect the demand for flex to grow much faster, while the demand for traditional space is going to take longer to come back. It's just a different use, right? I don't think that I expect traditional, like some companies not to want to build their own headquarters if it's 50% of their space, or if it's 25 or 75, whatever portion it is that they wanted to have 100% of their identity, and they might want us to build it for them or not. But I think that the mix is still going to be there, with flex definitely growing and going to a higher level than it was pre-COVID.
Right. And I think we have time for one more quick one. So how are developers and tenants factoring occupant transportation into their reopening strategies?
I can
think
talk
that's
through like Zoe. Zoe is our amenity platform. We have been partnering with a lot of, it depends on the city, right? When you talk about LA, is very different from talking about New York, where people have their cars in LA and not here. So talk about cities where everyone has their own car. We're really looking at how we can solve for additional parking, how we can solve for alternative sources of transportation, how we can now have more bike racks and adding showers and things like that. When we talk about New York, a city like New York City or San Francisco, or talking about London, Mark, I don't know if you're there, but really cities where not everyone owns a car, including me. I think that what we're looking at is very different. We're looking at partnering with companies that provide transportation to see how we can offer to our members and our tenants a greater discounts. We're partnering, we're looking at finding even buses so that they can go through a defined path and have social distancing to bring tenants to the space. We're definitely looking at more alternatives for transportation like bikes, again, just by having more of the city bikes in all of our properties, but also offering scooters and also having, as I mentioned at the beginning, additional bike racks and showers so that people can really not just ride their bike, but we're in the middle of the summer, they can also change and then go to their office. So I think we need to think about it. Likan was mentioning it before. It's a very important part of it.
Great, and with that, I think that just about wraps it up. Thank you all for taking the time to join this forum.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
And with that, that concludes today's program. We'd like to thank you all for joining in, and we want to give a special thank to our speakers and to our 2020 Future Property Forum sponsors, Atmos Air Solutions, Ascendis, sorry, I have trouble with that one, Foggity Finger Architecture, iLuminosity, Castle Benson Torres, Castle Systems, MG Engineering DPC, Prescriptive Data, View, as well as our association partners, NAIOP NYC and New York Building Congress. Be sure to look out for more upcoming virtual forums and programs on the Commercial Observer website, and have a great day.